with China because China, from our perspective, supports Russia. So if China supports the aggressor, and Russia is the biggest threat, how to cooperate with China. But from my understanding, it's because it's aggression, it's a violation. UN Charter is a black and white situation that you could not be between. You should condemn Russia or support. You could not be in between because it's black and white.
Now, in the same way, I was ambassador UN then. The United States invasion of Iraq in 2003 was not endorsed by the UN Security Council, was not an act of self-defense, and so Kofi Annan called it an illegal war. Now, let me ask you a simple question, a painful question. That was an illegal war. Did the European Union apply sanctions on the United States?
You said that for Asian countries, China is a predictable partner. So what about some kind of, let's say, China's, activities in the South China Sea, for example, the militarization and land reclamation? Yeah. What about the, let's say, China's activities around Taiwan? China's coercions against Lithuania is a kind of a new mode of coercion because China has decided to weaponize the supply chains.
So I think you should show some sensitivity, because Europe, at the end of the day, makes up less than 5% of the world's population. There are 95% out there. The remaining 95% have their own concerns and interests, which are very real also.
大家好，今天要分享的是新加坡国立大学亚洲研究所杰出研究员马凯硕教授在波兰华沙的一场演讲与对话的精彩节选。马凯硕教授是一位享誉全球的外交家和学者，他曾担任新加坡驻联合国大使超过10年，对国际地缘政治有着深刻而独到的洞察。在这场对话中，面对来自波兰国际事务研究所的欧洲精英们，马凯硕教授毫不回避尖锐问题，从乌克兰战争到美中竞争，从南海争端到台湾问题，双方展开了直来直往、火花四溅的交锋。一方坚持价值观不可妥协，一方坚持务实主义才是生存之道。这场对话几乎没有达成任何共识，却恰恰展现了当今世界最核心的分裂与张力。下面我们就来看看，在这场坦诚而激烈的对话中，双方到底说了什么？
But to be honest, I have several questions. But to be honest, I'm not completely agree with you in a sense that
I would be very surprised if you agree.
Yeah, okay, so let me ask you several questions referring to what you have said. First of all, you said that, of course, the Asian countries are focusing on the economic and social development, and economic situation will be better, the Asia would be number one, the world is preparing for Asia century. So my question is about this situation in China. Because, and also reading your book, I think that there is a kind of a change in China that I agree with you. You wrote this book a few years ago, that there is a kind of a social contract in China that a party or Xi Jinping government provides society the economic development, and there is a kind of a deal, and they could have this political system. People are pretty happy, and so on and so forth. But I have an impression that right now is a kind of a change of this contract, that this focus is on, in China, not on economy and economic development and social well-being, but mostly on the security issues. You know, I'm talking about this zero COVID policy, especially in the second hard lockdown, the economic problems that China is facing right now. The good example is this real estate crisis. Also, the fact that party decided to not to publish the data of youth unemployment. So this is the question: how the impact of China's economic situation may have on China and on Asia, also in this rivalry between United States and China. And also, as you said, that there is a kind of a dilemma in Europe when it comes to looking at this China-US rivalry. I think to be honest, there is a kind of a consensus that we should that we should cooperate with the United States, and that China is to some extent a challenge or even a threat. Of course, we do not to decouple. There is right now the de-risking slogan that we would like to, what we would like to have is to focus on strategic dependencies when it comes to our security issues. So I think in that sense there is no dilemma. And the last point, and also I would like to ask you, because of course for us right now the most important thing here in Europe is the war in Ukraine because of Russia's invasion. So how to deal with China, and also how to communicate with the Asian countries with China, because China, from our perspective, supports Russia. So if China supports the aggressor, and Russia is the biggest threat, how to cooperate with China and how to cooperate with the countries that do not have a very clear view when it comes to this invasion. I know that it's not a major topic in Asian countries, in ASEAN countries, but from my understanding, it's because it's aggression, it's a violation. UN Charter is a black and white situation that you could not be between. You should condemn Russia or support. You could not be in between, because it's a black and white situation. So this is my question to you after your remarks.
Thank you, thank you. I know, as I said, I'd be very surprised if you agree with me. We look at the world very differently from the other. But there are three big questions you're asking me. Number one, is the China growth story over? Number two, what are Europe's strategic interests? And number three, how do we factor in the Ukraine war? These are the three big questions. Now, the first question is the China growth story over? I always, whenever I speak to any audience, issue a commercial warning that never trust the Anglo-Saxon media on China. Because if you use the Anglo-Saxon media to understand China, you will get a very distorted perspective. And if you're interested, I can email you 20 years of headlines from major Western newspapers, including The Economist, saying, is China about to collapse? Is China about to collapse? China's story is over. It's 20 years, consistently. So this is what is happening now.
But I'm not talking about the collapse. I'm not, I don't want to be so extreme about collapse, but the economic problems that China is facing, let's say.
Yes, but you see, you're only hearing one side of the story. Do you know that last year, China overtook Japan to become the world's #1 automobile exporter? How come a country that is struggling becomes the world's #1 economics exporter? Did you hear that in the scientific journals, in Tier 1, peer-reviewed scientific journals, which country is now producing the largest number of peer-reviewed scientific papers in the world? Used to be United States, today is China. So what we Asians notice, China has got massive problems. But China has always had massive problems. China is the largest country in the world. The largest country in the world has the largest problems in the world. So yes, there are problems with the way they manage COVID. I think they handle COVID, the exit from COVID, very badly. They make mistakes. I mean, no country is perfect. Every country makes mistakes. China has made lots of mistakes too. The question is, can China learn from its mistakes and overcome it? And I can tell you that the Asian countries have decided that the China growth story is continuing. And they're going to be part of it. And they're going to integrate with China. So all the problems you mentioned, right? For example, the real estate crisis, they will solve it. It may take a few years, but they'll solve it. And don't forget, China still has the world's largest foreign reserves, $3 trillion, which they can do a lot with. They have all kinds of resources. And the Chinese have developed a very pragmatic way of managing these issues that they do. So this year is a bad year for China, 2023. Maybe they'll have 1 or 2 bad years. They'll come out of it. And remember, they only have to grow they've been growing at 8-9%, right, for the last 30 years. They only have to go to 4 to 5%, and then they can overtake the United States. So it's a question of the overall perspective. And anyway, I can assure you, if I come back here in 5 years' time, you will find that my predictions are right and the Anglo-Saxon media is wrong. I can confidently predict that. See? Now, the second point about Europe's strategic interests. Now, one point I always emphasize is that geopolitics is a very cruel business. If you try to inject moral values into geopolitics, you always get into trouble. Because it's all, at the end of the day, about interests that drive countries. Now, you mentioned this. The Russian invasion of Ukraine is illegal. It's absolutely clear. I was ambassador to UN for 10 years, and I know what makes a war legal and what makes a war illegal. A war is legal only if it's endorsed by UN Security Council or if it's an act of self-defense. The Russian invasion of Ukraine is not endorsed by UN Security Council, and also not an act of self-defense. Now, in the same way, I was ambassador to UN then. The United States invasion of Iraq in 2003 was not endorsed by the UN Security Council, was not an act of self-defense, and so Kofi Annan called it an illegal war. Now, let me ask you a simple question, a painful question. That was an illegal war. Did the European Union apply sanctions on the United States? So, and the rest of the world understood. You have your interests, perfectly natural. Your interests were very clear, right? So that's how countries make decisions. Now, if you read my book, I point out that what the European Union needs to be concerned about is its own long-term strategic challenges. And the biggest strategic challenge for Europe over the next 10, 20 years is going to come from the demographic explosion in Africa. Now, in the year 1950, Africa's population was half that of Europe's. Today, Africa's population is 2.5 times the size of Europe. By 2100, Africa's population will be 10 times the size of Europe. So your main strategic priority is to focus on the development of Africa, because otherwise, if you don't, the migrants that will come will create far stronger far-right parties in all over European Union. And then you will have a very different situation. But that, at the end of the day, it's your decision. It's your decision, not ours. But we in Asia, you notice, we don't have migrants, right? Because we create opportunities for jobs for people where they live, right? Indonesia, with a population of 260 million, is much poorer than its neighbor Australia. Australia's got 25 million. No migrants from Indonesia to Australia. Why? Indonesia creates hope for its people. Indonesia is one of the fastest growing economies in the world. So we are focused on creating stability for ourselves for the next 10 to 20 years. And I would encourage Europe to also focus on your own interests. Where are your interests? And focus on them, because that's your decision. And whatever decision you make is your right decision. Now, third question on Ukraine, one quick point. Just a very simple question. What is the difference between the Chinese position on Ukraine and India's position on Ukraine?
The same.
Huh?
The same.
They're exactly the same.
So to be frank, let me offer my personal perception.
Yeah.
I think that India is becoming like China, and I agree with you that India's position and China's position is the same, but it does not solve the problem. It's the additional problem that India, as a democratic country, has the same position on Russia's invasion. So this is the huge question for me also, how to deal with India, not only with China.
But let me add, I predict over the next 10 years, the United States will court India ferociously. I predict that, despite its position in Ukraine.
Well,
the reason I say this, geopolitics is a very cruel game, Unfortunately, I wish it wasn't. I wish that my predictions that I made 30 years ago didn't come true. Unfortunately, they keep coming true.
Professor, can I refer to your response to my questions about this China's situation, economic situation, and you said that we have access only to the Anglo-Saxon stories. To be frank, it's very difficult to have access to the Chinese information, you know. As a China expert, for years, I have an access to this database of China's articles in Chinese. I remember I went to China and I have to buy a kind of a card with some kind of code, and I could download the articles. Right now, it's impossible. A few years ago, it was very expensive. Right now, it's impossible. So, you know, it is also the problem with us that China is, in that sense, is not open country that I could not even download without asking my friends in China if they could help me, you know. So this is the problem of the access to the information. That is very difficult to have access to the information from China. And also talking to Chinese experts right now, they are also using, in my understanding, official talking points. You know, it's difficult to have the conversation which could be a little bit, let's say, critical about situation in China, some critical about the government. So this is also the question that maybe you're right, maybe it's a better situation in China that we think that we have problems to have an access to the information. So this is one issue. The second one about this situation and this Russia's invasion, and you said about Iraq and the United States. Well, I have an impression that it is that what you have said is whataboutism. Okay, I agree. We may criticize, but we are in a 20 years later, and Asian countries using the same, and China is using the same argument. What about war in Iraq? What about situation in Afghanistan? So let's go a step further and say, okay, there was a mistake. It was a mistake. We shouldn't do that. So maybe why we should also say, but what about? It's like a whataboutism. Don't you think that we should be pretty clear that is okay, it's an invasion, and so this is my question. And to be frank about our interest in cooperation with Africa, and so in your book you wrote that we should cooperate together with China when it comes to Africa. Well, generally speaking, yes, I know that we should, as a Europe, cooperate with Africa, and it's not a question. But right now, the biggest problem for us is the war that we have behind our border, the classical war with Russia as an aggressor. And to be honest, here in Poland, this is the biggest problem, the biggest question, that we are really afraid of a situation that Russia and Putin says is openly, that, let's say, Eastern flank, Poland, Baltic State and other targets after Ukraine. So it's not only war between Russia and Ukraine, it is war between Russia and the Western countries. So this is the biggest problem. And when you say about migrants, we have so many Ukrainians here because we accepted them, we open our arms, offer them shelters. So, you know, this is the biggest problem. Right now, okay, I agree that we should cooperate with Africa, but this is the biggest threat, the biggest challenge, the most important thing, that we have a war. It's not like a hybrid war, because to be honest, before the invasion, we thought that it could be kind of a hybrid war. You know, there is no any expectations that will be, let's say, classic, old-fashioned war, but we face it. There are people who are killing by Russians. So this is the most important issue, and we have a problem how to cooperate with other countries, how to convince them that it is our biggest threat, and how to cooperate with them if they think that it's not important. And talking about war in Iraq, okay, it's, from my understanding, it is whataboutism to some extent.
Well, for your first part of your question about getting information in China, and the second part about whataboutism, I guess is what you call it. It's an interesting phrase. Now, getting information in China is difficult. I agree with you. But unfortunately, China is a reality. 1.4 billion people are not going to go away. And China will become the world's largest economy. So we have the unfortunate responsibility of trying to understand our biggest neighbor, right? And but in one way or another, we Asians find that by traveling to China, I go there 3-4 times a year. I meet people, have reasonably candid conversations, sometimes about what is their problems and so on and so forth. And at the end of the day, most Asian countries find China a predictable partner. That if you make a deal with China, the deal sticks and it's done. And also, the world's largest free trade agreement was launched in January 2022. It includes, ASEAN countries proposed it, 10 ASEAN countries. It includes China, and includes 4 allies of the United States: Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand. So you can see that in Asia, we take a very pragmatic view of these things. If it works, we do it. And we will work with China, we will work with India, we will work with any country. We also work very closely with the United States, by the way. And in fact, the United States has invested more in ASEAN than it has in China, Japan, South Korea, India combined. So we have close ties with both. So that's our approach, is to be very pragmatic, focus on our interests, and then we carry on. Now, when you ask about the position, why doesn't the rest of the world take a strong a position on Ukraine as the Europe does? I think the Indian foreign minister replied to your question. Do you remember what he said? He said, I'm quoting the Indian foreign minister. He said, the problem with Europe is that Europeans think that Europe's problems are the world's problems, but the world's problems are not Europe's problems. So he said, for example, why did you all run away from Afghanistan? You spent so many years there. The West just abandoned Afghanistan, and then the region has got to pick up the pieces. He says, why isn't Afghanistan important? So I think it's important for Europeans to show some degree of sensitivity to the interests and needs of other people, including the interests and needs of people who are much poorer than Europeans. And I would say exhibit A is the Africans, right? Now, as you know, in Asia, 3 countries have imposed sanctions on Russia: Japan, South Korea, and Singapore. 3 countries. But the rest of Asians, no sanctions on Russia. Among Africans, no African has imposed sanctions on Russia. Among South Americans, no country in South America has imposed sanctions on Russia. So I think you should ask yourself, why are they not doing so? And the simple answer is that they have their own needs and concerns and interests. They have their own problems, their own challenges they have to deal with, right? So I think you should show some sensitivity, because Europe at the end of the day makes up less than 5% of the world's population. There are 95% out there. The remaining 95% have their own concerns and interests, which are very real also. And in the case of India, as you know, India's main priority now is to focus on growth and development to eliminate poverty in India. And one way they're doing it, when the prices of oil went up, as you know, India went from buying 1% of Russian oil to buying 20% of Russian oil, because they had to keep their economy growing. But what's shocking is that India is now exporting some of its Russian oil to Europe, and Europe is buying it. And these are examples of the pragmatic decisions that are made. So I think it is very, when you talk to the rest of the world, don't give them a black and white view of the world, because the world is very complex and very nuanced. And if you can engage the world and understand these complexities and these nuances, then you will understand this. And as you know, even in the case of Poland also, I don't know whether I should mention this. The latest development came as a big shock to me, right? I mean, it was when I read that, I said, cannot be. Didn't Poland say that they will stop supplying weapons to Ukraine? Yeah, but that's what came out in the media. But it's also true that you've had a big fight with Ukraine. No, but the whole world read it. It's amazing. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so yes, I will open the floor to you, but I have one additional question to Professor, because you said that, so my question is, because you said about the African countries, Asian countries, that they have own interests, India is in own interest, that of course we are focusing on our problems in Europe, and we should not think that the whole world will be focusing on our problems. But so I have a question about something which is called the food security. Because there is, as Ukraine as a producer of grain, and now, of course, there is a debate here in Europe, but don't you think that we should explain to the, let's say, other countries that, for example, the problems with the food that they are facing with the supply after this invasion is because of Russia? Because I have some understanding that what the countries, non-European countries, think, that they do not see that Russia is an aggressor, and what is happening after the aggression, which is detrimental for those countries, is because of Russia, not because of Ukraine or Europe as Europe. So this is a kind of a logical problem for me, that many countries, they have pretty good relations with Russia. They have its own interest, but at the end of the day, the problems they have, for example, with some food deliveries, is because of Russia. So this is the problem for me: how to convince them, and how to explain it. So, because after this discussion and what you said about the perception in Asia, in Africa, so it means that international does not matter. We can break the law, if you like, and we say, okay, we have our own interest. UN Charter does not matter. This is for me, there's a problem, because for me still, okay, I'm European, I'm in Poland, I'm in a country that shares border with Ukraine. That is still black and white situation, especially when it comes to the aggression. It's not like, you like the country or not, or you do not like, but it's, so this, and the one additional, and I open the floor, I promise. You said that for Asian countries, China is a predictable partner. So what about some kind of, let's say, China's, activities in the South China Sea, for example, the militarization, the land reclamation, the kind of, I know it's not an ASEAN country, but what about this coercion against Australia? What about the, let's say, China's activities around the Taiwan? What about this kind of activities that China is doing, which are not, let's say, which are security related, to be honest, and not, and China is, because to be honest, in Europe, for example, in Central Europe, very important moment was that we started to rethink our perception of China to some, for example, a coercion against Lithuania. China's coercions against Lithuania is a kind of a new mode of coercion, because China has decided to weaponize the supply chains. So I'd like to ask you about this question. I will open, and then I will open the floor to our audience.
Each of the issues you raise may take half an hour to answer. I'll give very brief answers. And there are problems, by the way. I mean, South China Sea, you're right. There are problems. There are differing claims between China and ASEAN countries. But, if you read my book, Has China Won? In the chapter on South China Sea, I begin by describing what one of the most distinguished American ambassadors to China told me. His name is Ambassador Stapleton Roy. He understands China very, very well. He grew up in China as a young boy, as a father of missionary parents in China. So his understanding of China is among the best in the world. And at a lunch that I had with him, and he allowed me to quote him in the book, he said that, Kishore, when Xi Jinping proposed the demilitarization of the South China Sea to President Obama, he said Obama should have seized that offer from President Xi, say, okay, let's agree. Let's demilitarize the South China Sea. And he said, instead, this is Ambassador Stapleton Roy, American ambassador saying this. Instead, he said, we foolishly rebuffed him and we stepped up our naval presence in the South China Sea. And this is an American ambassador saying that America made a mistake in rebuffing an offer from China. That is something you will never read in Anglo-Saxon media. So, and I have his permission. You can go and double check with him if you want what he said. And in the case of reclamation of islands, it's important to at least state as a fact that the first country to reclaim land in the South China Sea was not China. Unfortunately, the ASEAN countries decided to do so. But the problem is that when the ASEAN countries claim 20 acres, the Chinese claim 2,000 acres. They're so big. You cannot compete with China, right? But if you ask me, will there be war between China and ASEAN countries in the South China Sea? Again, I make this prediction, there'll be no war. Come and see me in 5 years and let me know whether I was right or wrong. And why won't there be war? Because there are differences, there are challenges, but we keep on talking to each other. And we keep on emphasizing we've got to find solutions that work for both of us. And the reality is this. This is an unfortunate geopolitical reality that has been around for 2,000 years. When great powers emerge, you can't stop them. Don't expect the great power to adjust to you. You figure out, how do I deal with that great power? Because it's an asymmetry of power. And just as, when the United States emerged in the late 19th century, it conquered territories in Central America. It conquered Philippines from Spain in 1895, I think. And guess what? You adjust to a new power. These are realities. And as a student of geopolitics for 50 years, I know that if you don't understand geopolitical realities will come and slap you in the face if you come from a small state like Singapore. So our position is that we will adjust depending on how the great powers are doing. And we do our best. But at the same time, so far, I can tell you that East Asia is thriving. It's amazing. The growth is absolutely phenomenal. And it was going to be even more massive growth. So for us, frankly, the world looks like a very happy place. I know it's very hard to say this here in Europe, but for us, in terms of the last 20 years have been wonderful years, the next 30 years are going to be even better years, so why should we complain?
看完马凯硕教授在波兰华沙这场直面欧洲学者的完整对话，再回头梳理整场你来我往，毫不避讳的激烈问答，心里生出的感慨远不止简单的观点对立。整场对话最珍贵的地方不在于分出谁对谁错，而是把当今世界最根本的认知撕裂完完整整摊在了所有人面前。一边是扎根欧洲历史，以统一规则和普世价值为标尺的西方视角，另一边是见证100年殖民背负发展重担，以本国民生利益为第一优先级的亚洲务实视角。 两种思维体系正面碰撞，全程没有妥协，没有刻意缓和，每一个问题，每一段回答都精准戳中当下全球地缘矛盾的核心根源。首先，我们先复盘整场对话最核心的矛盾起点，也就是俄乌冲突带来的立场分歧。在场波兰学者作为冲突的直接邻近方，天然拥有切肤的安全焦虑。在他们的认知里，这场战争是毫无争议的单方面侵略，联合国宪章白纸黑字写着主权不可侵犯，所有国家理应站在同一阵线谴责，实施制裁不存在中立、观望平衡路线的空间。在欧洲的价值体系中，漠视侵略就是纵容暴力，模糊立场就是背弃国际规则，这是一套非黑即白、不容折中逻辑。但马凯硕教授从联合国10年大使的亲身经历出发，直接撕开这套单一标准下隐藏的双重标准，也是整场对话最有力的论据。他清晰回忆2003年美国绕过联合国安理会，单方面发动伊拉克战争，时任联合国秘书长安南公开定性这场军事行动为非法战争。按照欧洲当下评判俄乌冲突的同一套宪章标准，这场战争同样违反国际准则，同样造成数十万平民伤亡，同样未经合法授权。可当年欧盟没有出台任何针对美国的制裁，没有要求全球国家一同孤立美方，甚至多数西方国家主动配合美国行动，同样一条国际法。发生在欧洲边境就要求全世界统一站队，发生在中东就选择性淡化豁免这套双标逻辑，正是亚非拉国家很难完全认同欧洲价值观的关键原因。教授进一步拆解全球人口结构带来的视角鸿沟，一句欧洲人口只占全球不到 5%， 剩下 95% 的人有完全不一样的生存难题，短短一句话道尽东西方隔阂的本质。欧洲经过上百年工业化积累，早已完成脱贫、社会福利、安全体系成熟，才有条件把价值观、国际道义放在外交首位。可放眼亚洲、非洲、南美洲绝大多数国家，摆在政府面前第一位的永远是粮食安全、底层脱贫、能源稳定、国内就业。对于很多低收入国家而言，跟随欧洲全面制裁俄罗斯，会直接推高本国油价、粮价，让普通民众买不起米面，加不起燃油，引发国内通胀动荡。国家领导人首要职责是守护本国民众基本生存，不可能为了远方的地缘道义牺牲本国普通人的温饱。这不是不讲规则，而是完全不同的发展处境造就的现实选择。现场欧洲学者很难共情这一点，他们不断追问，难道可以为了利益无视侵略事实，无视联合国宪章吗？马凯硕没有否认宪章的重要性，而是区分了理想规则和现实地缘。他直言，地缘政治本就是一场残酷博弈，所有国家做外交决策，底层驱动力永远是本国核心利益，没有任何大国会纯粹依靠道德价值观制定对外政策。他举了印度的实例，印度和西方同样倡导民主价值观，可俄乌冲突之后，印度持续大量进口俄罗斯低价原油，再经过加工精炼转售欧洲，一边和欧美开展高层合作，一边坚持自身能源利益，这套平衡外交路线是绝大多数发展中国家的共同选择。非洲所有国家、南美全部国家，至今没有一个参与对俄制裁，不是他们认可冲突行为，而是他们承受不起制裁带来的民生代价。话题从俄乌冲突延伸至中美竞争，这也是整场对话争论不休的重点。波兰学者受西方主流媒体长期叙事影响，接连抛出多重质疑，包括中国经济下行压力、房地产危机、青年失业数据不再公开、防疫政策调整带来的冲击。他们普遍持有一种主流西方判断：中国高速增长时代已经落幕，发展模式难以为继。面对一连串负面提问，马凯硕没有回避客观存在的经济阵痛，但同时指出西方媒体长达20年的持续偏见。过去20年间，几乎所有英美主流报刊每隔2-3年就刊发专题，预判中国经济即将崩盘。可20多年过去，中国依旧保持全球主要经济体里稳定增长水平。他拿出2组实打实的数据作为佐证。第一，中国汽车出口总量正式超越日本，稳居全球第一。 新能源产业链完整覆盖上下游，成为全球汽车产业核心供给国。第二，全球顶级同行评审科学期刊，中国每年刊发的科研论文数量已经超过美国，在新能源、航天、生物医药、基建等领域持续突破。不可否认，14亿人口的超大规模国家转型阶段必然伴随各类结构性问题，房地产调整、青年就业压力都是客观存在的阶段性难题。但中国手握超3万亿外汇储备，拥有完整工业产业链、庞大国内消费市场，具备充足的政策缓冲空间。东南亚所有东盟国家如今全力推进 RCEP 区域贸易协定，主动深化和中国经贸往来，各国都笃定中国长期发展红利不会短期消失，这是周边国家用实际行动做出的判断，远比媒体片面报道更有说服力。随后对话进入南海、台海、立陶宛经贸摩擦等高频争议议题，也是欧洲舆论炒作最多的内容。现场学者接连抛出岛礁军事化、填海造陆、台海常态化讯号、供应链武器化等指责，认定中国主动采取对抗性手段，挤压周边与西方国家。马凯硕依旧保持客观中立的梳理，不带情绪化辩解，只陈述完整历史脉络。关于南海填海最先开展岛礁改造、扩建设施的并不是中国，周边多个东盟国家数十年前就已经率先动工，只是中国基建体量更大，才被西方舆论单独放大。他还分享了美国前驻华大使司徒雷登的重要观点。早年中方曾经主动向奥巴马政府提出南海共同非军事化的合作提议，美方非但没有接纳，反而持续加大南海常态化军舰巡航，不断强化区域军事部署，一步步推高区域紧张氛围。同时，教授客观点明大国崛起的历史规律。纵观近现代历史，19世纪美国快速崛起阶段，通过战争、领土扩张重塑美洲地缘格局，周边国家只能主动适应力量变化，这是千年不变的地缘现实。如今东亚没有走向阵营对抗，中国和东盟常年开展双边高层磋商，持续推进南海行为准则谈判，依靠对话管控分歧。 RCEP 覆盖中日韩东盟澳新多国，用经贸绑定化解安全矛盾，这套务实共处模式和西方热衷阵营对抗的思路截然不同。至于对立陶宛的经贸调整，教授解释这是主权国家正常的经贸反制选择，每个国家都有权利基于自身核心利益调整贸易往来，西方多国也曾多次动用关税、贸易限制手段制衡他国双重标准依旧清晰可见。整场交流中还有一个极具长远眼光的预判，马凯硕教授提出，未来10年美国会不计代价拉拢印度，哪怕印度和美国在俄乌议题、中东政策上立场完全相悖，在地缘利益面前，短期价值观共识永远会让步于长期战略布局。这个预判精准点破当下国际格局底层逻辑。欧美习惯用价值划分阵营，但新兴大国、发展中国家只会根据自身需求灵活调整对外关系，不会简单绑定单一阵营。这也是东西方思维最核心的分水岭。欧洲追求价值观同盟，亚洲、非洲追求利益平衡共存，两种路线很难互相说服。整场对话从头到尾，双方没有达成任何共识。欧洲学者始终无法接受利益优先的外交逻辑，坚持国际法与普世价值应当凌驾各国局部利益。马凯硕教授也始终没有妥协，持续提醒欧洲正视全球多元化现实，不要用占世界5%人口的视角定义剩下95%人的生存，恰恰是这种完全无法调和的分歧，为我们揭开当下全球分裂的真相。全球化早已不再是西方单一主导的全球化，亚非拉发展中国家话语权持续提升，多元诉求、多元发展道路、多元外交思路正在不断冲击过去几百年西方建立的单一秩序。很多观众看完这类东西方对话，总会下意识分出对错，站对其中一方。但看完马凯硕这场华沙现场交流，我们更应该学会跳出单一信息茧房。欧洲学者的焦虑，对主权规则的坚守， 源于他们身处冲突前沿的安全处境，完全可以理解马凯硕代表的亚洲务实视角，源于殖民历史、发展困境、庞大发展中国家群体的共同诉求。同样有坚实现实支撑，世界不是一道非黑即白的单选题，不同地域、不同发展阶段的国家注定拥有完全不同的判断标准。强行要求全球统一一套价值观、一套评判尺度，本身就脱离真实世界。长期只接收单一来源的新闻报道，很容易固化固有偏见。而像马凯硕这场毫无回避的直面对话，难得把两种对立逻辑完整摆在一起，让我们看见舆论背后真实的国家利益、历史底色与生存困境。看懂欧亚之间这层根深蒂固的认知壁垒，我们才能更清醒地看待俄乌冲突、中美竞争、南海、台海等一系列国际热点，不再被片面报道裹挟情绪，建立更立体、更客观的全球视野。好了，本期马凯硕教授华沙对话完整解读到这里就全部结束了。为了给大家完整还原这场海外线下高端对话，我完整翻译了整场问答原文，逐条梳理双方问答逻辑，补充历史背景与相关数据，前后耗费了大量时间和精力。如果本期深度内容让你跳出以往固化认知，对东西方地缘差异有全新的理解，麻烦动动手指，点赞订阅本频道。你的支持也是我持续分享优质海外深度访谈内容的动力。不管你更认同欧洲的价值优先思路，还是更认可马凯硕教授提出的全球多元务实视角，对于俄乌冲突、中美博弈、南海、台海议题、东西方双重标准这些话题，你都可以在评论区留下自己完整的观点、疑问或是不同看法。每一条评论我都会逐条认真阅读，有代表性的观点我也会在后续视频中和大家一起讨论交流。如果大家还有想看的海外学者访谈地缘政治深度对话素材，也可以在评论区告诉我，我会持续整理拆解更多优质原版对话内容分享给大家。我们下期再见。